Oh, hello. What brings you to my dreary winter abode? Ah, I see. You want another game review. Well, I haven't made one of those in like 2 weeks, so why don't you sit down and let me regale you with a tale of Forgive Me, Father 2.
Forgive Me, Father 2 is the sequel to Forgive Me, Father, a boomer shooter that launched in 2022. I played through the first game for this review as well as the second, and I will be comparing the two a little bit, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that, since this is a review, not a comparison. Being a boomer shooter, players are tasked with navigating an area, finding color-coded keys to unlock color-coded doors, all whilst, in this case, combating the cosmic horror that is the inner workings of the main character's mind. Forgive Me, Father 2 has the familiar tropes one would find in a boomer shooter. A large cast of enemies, hidden secrets throughout each level, and a crap ton of guns, most of which are of a seafood variety. Actually, let's talk about the weapon categories. There are 6 weapon categories available to the player: the knife, the pistol, the shotgun, the rifle, the launcher, and the exotic. Each of these has 4 variants, which can be purchased with tokens. Some of these variants are decent. The double barrel is a powerhouse. It tears through tough enemies. The only downside is the low maximum ammo. On the other hand, some of these variants need a proper setup with the Dark Tome to really shine. For example, pairing Health Steal with the otherwise lacking Bloom Siphon for a quick heal is great when fighting a horde of 20 guys, but the damage output is otherwise lacking. Finally, some of these variants straight up suck, like the Assault Rifle's Anemone, which has the range of a piss stream and can also damage the players with its explosions. Or the Exotic's Flamethrower, which has low damage output, but makes up for it by engulfing enemies as well as the area in flames, dealing damage over time. The caveat is that it obscures vision way too much. Well, if you're wondering why there's so much footage of me using the Flamethrower when I just said it kinda sucks, it's pretty simple. I have a hard-on for damage over time weapons. Having circumstantial weapons isn't a huge issue. The problem is the process of unlocking weapons. In the original Forgive Me, Father, players unlock more abilities and weapon variants by killing enemies and leveling up. In Forgive Me, Father 2, players unlock weapon variants by picking up tokens and spending said tokens in the hub world. If a player enters a mission with a weapon they don't like or is ineffective without the proper Dark Tome loadout, well, they're shit out of luck. To make things worse, the tokens the player used to purchase the weapon they either hate or is incredibly useless are wasted and cannot be refunded. In the original game, everything was based on a tech tree, and that tech tree was able to be reset so the player could change their build if needed. I won't say it's better, but it is certainly more flexible. That brings us to the aforementioned Dark Tome. The Dark Tome is an interesting trinket. This is basically a book that can have up to 3 pages selected, each of which page enhances the player. There are 2 types of pages within the Dark Tome: active, which activates upon the press of a button, and passive, which is continuous effects. What? You want examples? Fine. You got faster reload and faster fire rate with your shotgun, the previously mentioned life steal, and then you got the, I don't know, lightning bullets. That's enough. I guess this is how this game kind of differentiates itself from other boomer shooters, at least mechanically. Players don't start with all pages available. They are discovered from interacting with story collectibles throughout the missions, and then purchased later in the hub world between missions. The level design for Forgive Me, Father 2 is hit or miss. While all the levels are visually appealing, except for Mushroom World, they also feature the good old yellow paint. Yeah, because gamers are way too stupid to know which way to go. Actually, this is kind of a nitpick, but I want to bring it up more or less because I really don't like the trend of yellow paint when there's so many better ways to do it. I guess they did this to make up for the fact that there is no mapping system built into the game. Personally, I'll take a map and visual cues over garish and counter-immersive neon paint any day. I don't mind being lost in a game for 5 or 10 minutes, especially when it's a game loaded with secrets, of which I might accidentally stumble upon when I'm looking for a way to progress. The quality of arenas within levels varies. Most of them are fine. The biggest issue with the game is the enemies have a tendency to blend into the landscape.
Well, this isn't too bad when you're fighting 3 or 4 enemies, but when you're fighting 20 guys, 4 of which are jumping around with invincibility frames shooting homing missiles at you, while 6 other assholes are on a balcony trying to snipe you, well, that's a different story.
The enemy variety is great, but the visual clutter makes it hard to tell which enemies to target first, or even where they are. This can result in some frustrating segments. Basically, sometimes it actually does suck, but most of the time it's just a skill issue. Like I said before, aside from the blending issues, the basic enemies are fine. There's a decent amount of variety and they look cool. The bosses though, there's some asshole scientist boss that was way more annoying than enjoyable. And then there was a sky blob, which was way too easy after the science prick. That's just 2 of the bosses.
The final boss was a huge letdown. When it comes to Forgive Me Father 2, it has a very distinct aesthetic. I've heard it described as comic book styled. I guess that's about right.
Personally, it reminds me of Darkest Dungeon, mixed with an obscure graphic novel adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. I can't remember the artist or the title of the book, but Google search tells me it's probably Pete Katz.
Don't quote me on that. I'm going off of a distant memory based on some pages I found on a Google search.
All of the enemies, as well as several objects, are 2D. This is a design choice kept from the original game. However, unlike the original game, the sprite animation here is actually fairly smooth. The texture and model designs of the world are also a pretty hefty upgrade from the original game in terms of quality.
Alright, so slight spoiler warning. Skip to the timestamp over here if you want to skip any potential spoilers.
So, what's the story of Forgive Me Father 2? Well, I'm not really the right person to ask since I basically ignored all of these story snippets placed throughout the levels, but at face value, it's about the priest from the first game who's going through some form of psychosis. This is causing him to do battle with the demons of his past. To be frank, most of this game doesn't feel very cosmic horror to me. It feels like a surface level take on psychological horror with some Lovecraftian themes. When you look at the definition of cosmic horror, the horror aspect comes from an incomprehensible threat that no one can understand. Whereas with psychological horror, it has more or less to do with internal factors, like anxieties, regrets, self-loathing, and PTSD made manifest into some sort of horrific imagery. Honestly, the game's themes feel like it's closer to Silent Hill than anything cosmic horror, especially given the ending.
So, given what I said, wouldn't the lack of any external factors mean that Forgive Me Father 2 is more closely related to a psychological horror than a cosmic horror? Or maybe I'm overthinking things and psychological horror and cosmic horror really start to coalesce when you're in the middle of a severe bout of crippling depression.
Hey, you, bitch in the bed. You're worthless. Your parents are disappointed in you. Hey, you. Remember that one time in kindergarten when you were playing t-ball and you somehow managed to strike out and then you proceeded to cry in front of the whole class? I really think you should kill yourself for that. Hey, remember that one guy on Twitter who called you an idiot for not liking the Mufasa movie? You should definitely kill yourself.
Either way, it's a boomer shooter, and you really shouldn't be playing a boomer shooter for its story.
I think the last things we'll talk about is the sound design and performance. To be honest, I couldn't find a place to throw these, so here we go. As I've said before, and I'll say it a million times again, it's really hard to point out good sound design, but very easy to point out the bad. I'm not going to pretend that I'm great when it comes to this aspect of recognition. I didn't notice any bad sound design. In fact, I think it's one of the better parts of the game. One of the things I really appreciated was that enemy types have a distinct moan, kinda like Pokemon cries, but more upsetting. Well, the devs set it up so when an enemy would aggro the player, they moan, and that signals to the player that there is a specific type of enemy targeting them. This also happens when groups of enemies spawn in during a horde fight, letting the player know at least one type of opponent has entered the field, which is honestly great considering how visually messy certain areas of this game can be.
This is just one example. I'm sure there's plenty more, but I'm not going to try to convince you that I'm smarter than I actually am.
I'm past my metalhead days, but I still appreciated the music. I really liked how the music would ramp up when a fight was starting. That was great. Don't take my word for it, listen to this.
Well, I guess it's time to go over Forgive Me Father 2's performance. Well, honestly, it's kind of ass.
I don't know what it is with this game, but the performance takes hits frequently, whether it's frame stuttering or just inconsistent frame rate. It's not great. It's really annoying in fights, and can make an already annoying fight significantly worse. This is definitely the most important issue for Byte Barrel to resolve. So, final verdict. Forgive Me Father is a decent boomer shooter, 75% of the time. Some visual messiness can make certain parts of the game frustrating, certain design choices are less than ideal, and the performance leaves much to be desired. That said, there is still a lot of fun that can be had in this game. The levels are all very distinct and memorable, except for the fucking mushroom zone. And the enemies are unique, not to mention the music is decent. Overall, a pretty decent boomer shooter, if you ask me.
That said, I really have a hard time recommending Forgive Me Father 2. The performance problems are really nasty, and unless you are a huge fan of boomer shooters, I wouldn't pay full price for this game. I would wait until a sale where it's like $20 or lower, to be fair. That being said, I do think once a couple performance patches come out, as well as some balance changes, I think the game is easily going to be worth the $24 asking price. It's just one of those things where the game is at a state where it's playable, but it really just needs to be polished. While that might sound cheap, you have to keep in mind that I am indeed poor. This isn't even my house. I killed a man.